February 1942, Camp Elliott, San Diego. A group of high-ranking Marine Corps officers gather for a demonstration they are certain will be a waste of time. Before them, two young Navajo men are handed a complex combat message. They exchange a rapid flurry of sounds, a language the officers have never heard. In 28 seconds, the message is encoded, transmitted by field radio, and decoded flawlessly. The standard military encryption machine for the same task, the M209, would have taken over 30 minutes. The officers are silent. They have just witnessed something that shouldn't be possible. This is the story of how that 28-second demonstration launched one of the most audacious intelligence programs of the war, turning an ancient, unwritten language into an unbreakable military code. It raises a difficult central question. How could a nation that systematically tried to eradicate this language suddenly turn to it for salvation? And what was the true, hidden cost for the young men who became living, breathing encryption machines? To understand this radical choice, one must first understand the crisis that forced it. By early 1942, the United States was losing the information war in the Pacific. From the Philippines to the Solomon Islands, American forces were fighting blindfolded. The reason was brutally simple. Imperial Japanese intelligence was astonishingly effective. Their signals units, the Tokumelhan, were staffed with highly skilled, often American-educated officers who had an intimate understanding of English slang, military procedure, and, most critically, American cryptography. They were consistently intercepting and deciphering U.S. military communications, sometimes within hours. This wasn't a theoretical advantage. It had devastating, real-world consequences. Convoys were ambushed. Marine positions were pinpointed for artillery strikes. Battle plans were known to the Japanese before American commanders on the ground even received their final orders. The U.S. was hemorrhaging men and material because its secrets were an open book. At the heart of this failure was a piece of technology meant to be a solution, the M209 converter, a portable encryption machine issued to frontline units. In a European city, it was a marvel of mechanical engineering. In the humid, muddy jungles of Guadalcanal, it was a liability. The delicate internal mechanisms would jam with dirt or corrode in the moisture, but its greatest weakness was time. For a Marine platoon under fire, needing immediate artillery support, the M209 presented an impossible choice. Encrypting a short message, setting the key wheels, typing it out, and radioing the coded groups could take 30 minutes. Decrypting it on the other end took just as long. An hour could pass before help was even dispatched. In a firefight, an hour is an eternity. The alternative was to transmit in the clear, using plain English over the radio, but they knew the Japanese were listening. To speak freely was to broadcast your exact position, your strength, and your desperation directly to the enemy. It was a choice between a fatal delay and a fatal disclosure. This communications paralysis was crippling the Marine Corps. A solution was needed, and it had to be faster and more secure than any machine. The answer wouldn't come from a government laboratory. It would come from a civilian engineer, haunted by a memory from his childhood. That civilian was Philip Johnston, a World War I veteran and Los Angeles civil engineer. But his most valuable qualification came from his childhood as the son of missionaries on the Navajo Nation. He was one of fewer than 30 non-Navajo people estimated to be fluent in the language. In February 1942, Johnston read a newspaper story about the Army using Native American soldiers in field communications. He immediately saw a flaw and an opportunity. The languages being used were from tribes whose members had been studied by German anthropologists before the war. But Navajo was different. It was an unwritten, tonal language of extreme grammatical complexity, with no linguistic relatives in Europe or Asia. It was, he believed, the foundation for a perfect code. He took his unorthodox proposal to the Marine Corps at Camp Elliott. The initial response from command was dismissive, but with Japanese intelligence running circles around them, Major General Clayton B. Vogel was desperate enough to listen. He authorized a demonstration. After witnessing its speed, Vogel took a calculated risk. On May 5, 1942, a secret directive was issued. Recruit an initial pilot group of 29 Navajo men. Johnston's crazy idea was now official Marine Corps policy. The first 29 recruits arrived at Camp Pendleton, California in May 1942. They were plunged into the brutal regimen of Marine Corps boot camp, but their real test began after graduation. Gathered in a secured classroom, they were confronted with a problem that had never occurred to the generals who sent for them. The Navajo language, or Diné Bizad, had no words for battleship, dive bomber, or machine gun. An ancient language built for a world of canyons and livestock had no vocabulary for industrial warfare. Simply speaking Navajo over the radio would be gibberish to the Japanese, but it would also be gibberish to their own commanders. The language itself wasn't the weapon. It was the raw material from which a weapon had to be forged. So, under intense pressure, they began to build a new language, a code nested inside their own. It was a two-tiered system of breathtaking ingenuity. First, they created a specialized dictionary. They assigned Navajo words to over 200 critical military terms using creative, descriptive associations. A submarine, an unseen predator, became Beshlo, the iron fish. A dive bomber, with its high-pitched engine noise, became Guinea, the chicken hawk. A battleship was a Lotso, a whale. Grenades were Nimasi, or potatoes. But what about names, coordinates, or terms not in their dictionary? For this, they built the second tier, a substitution alphabet. To transmit the letter A code talker would say the Navajo word for ant, Walachi. For B, the word for bear, Shush. For C, the word for cat, Moasi. Spelling out the single word Navy required transmitting three distinct Navajo words, Tsa, needle, Walachi, ant, and Akadiglani, victor. This wasn't a conversation. It was a high-speed oral cipher system, memorized and executed with absolute precision. By September 1942, the first of these newly trained code talkers were deployed into the meat grinder of Guadalcanal. Their arrival was met with confusion and suspicion. To the battle-hardened Marines in the foxholes, these new men looked out of place, speaking a language no one could understand. Some were mistaken for Japanese soldiers. They were an unknown quantity in a place where the unknown got you killed. That suspicion evaporated with the first combat transmission. A Marine unit, pinned down by a Japanese mortar position, desperately needed artillery support. The old way, using the M209 cipher machine, would have taken a half hour they didn't have. Instead, a code talker got on the radio. He relayed the enemy's grid coordinates, the type of weapon, and the urgency of the request. The entire message was transmitted, decoded, and understood at the artillery command post in under 25 seconds. Minutes later, American shells rained down on the Japanese position, silencing it. Commanders who witnessed these transmissions were stunned. Major Howard Connor, a 5th Marine Division signal officer, would later state, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima." On Guadalcanal, the proof was undeniable. The crazy idea that began as a 28-second demonstration in San Diego was now a war-winning reality. Across the Pacific, at Japanese listening posts from Rabaul to Truk, intelligence officers were intercepting these new, bizarre transmissions. Their best cryptanalysts, men who had effortlessly broken American codes for months, were completely stonewalled. The sounds were guttural, tonal, and followed no recognizable linguistic or mathematical pattern. They logged it, gave it the designation Code Able, and assigned teams to break it. They failed. Post-war interrogations of Japanese intelligence officers revealed the depth of their confusion. They theorized it might be a complex new machine-generated cipher, or perhaps even a code using obscure, manipulated animal sounds. The one possibility they never seriously considered was that they were listening to a human language. To their logical, methodical minds, the idea that the Americans would weaponize an indigenous, unwritten tongue was too absurd, too outside the box to be a primary line of inquiry. This failure of imagination gave the Marines an unprecedented tactical advantage, a communications channel that was, for all practical purposes, completely secure. The stunning success at Guadalcanal transformed the program from a limited experiment into a strategic priority. The Marine Corps began an aggressive new recruiting campaign across the Navajo Nation. The original 29 code talkers became instructors for hundreds of new recruits. The codebook itself was expanded from just over 200 terms to 411, and eventually to more than 650, incorporating new technology and battlefield realities. Navajo Code Talkers were no longer a novelty. They became an integral, essential component of every major Marine amphibious assault for the rest of the war. They were the central nervous system of the island-hopping campaign, landing on the beaches of Bougainville, Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu. From division headquarters on ships offshore to platoon leaders pinned down on the beach, the Code Talkers were the vital link, transmitting orders and intelligence with a speed and security the enemy could not match. They had become one of the Marine Corps' most valuable assets, but that value came at a terrible price, creating a dark operational reality that was kept secret for decades. A Code Talker was not just a radio man, he was a living encryption machine. The entire security of the system rested on his knowledge, his survival, and his silence. This led to a grim, unspoken protocol. If a Code Talker were to be captured, the enemy could, through interrogation, unravel the entire code, compromising every Marine operation in the Pacific. The solution was as brutal as it was logical. A Code Talker could not be taken alive. While no official written order has ever been found, post-war interviews confirm the reality. Many Code Talkers were assigned bodyguards, fellow Marines whose implicit and sometimes explicit duty was to protect the code at all costs. As Code Talker Chester Nez recalled, his bodyguard told him plainly, "If you get captured, I'm supposed to shoot you." The men who held the key to victory were now operating with the knowledge that their greatest value was as a secret, not as a person. This dark protocol would face its ultimate test in the war's most brutal furnace. February 19, 1945, Iwo Jima. The island was less a battlefield than a subterranean fortress of interlocking tunnels and hidden artillery. As the 5th Marine Division clawed for a foothold on the black volcanic beaches, their command systems disintegrated. Telephone wires were shredded by shellfire the moment they were laid. Radio channels were jammed or fatally slow. The assault was dissolving into isolated, desperate firefights. In this critical 48-hour window, the entire operational network for thousands of Marines was reduced to just 6 men, a team of Navajo Code Talkers working in relentless shifts. They became the sole thread connecting the chaos of the beach to the command ships offshore. In those first 2 days, they flawlessly transmitted and received over 800 critical messages. This wasn't just information, it was survival. They maneuvered units away from kill zones, directed naval gunfire onto unseen bunkers, and guided reinforcements to crumbling flanks. The division's signal officer, Major Howard Connor, stated it plainly in his after-action report. Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. With Japan's surrender, the war in the Pacific was over. The Navajo Code, used in every major Marine assault from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima, was never broken. But for the more than 400 men who wielded it, the story did not end in a victory parade. Instead, it vanished. The entire program was classified as top secret, and the Code Talkers were ordered to never speak of their role, not to the press, not to historians, not even to their own families. They returned home to the Navajo Nation, to the same poverty and discrimination they had left, now carrying the weight of a secret that would be kept for over 2 decades. Here lies the story's deepest paradox. A nation in crisis turned to a culture it had tried to erase, used its unique linguistic heritage as a decisive strategic advantage, and then, once the crisis was over, demanded their silence and pushed them back into the margins. The code was never broken. But the silence, a secret the men were ordered to keep for more than 20 years, was not unbreakable. When it finally gave way, their story became a permanent part of the history they had so decisively helped to write.